We've been asking the question for quite some time. What's next in the case against Chad Daybell, Lori Vallow Daybell? Are they going to stick together? Are they going to keep the same story going every single case? Or is something going to happen? Is Chad going to flip on Lori? Is Lori going to flip on Chad? Well, we got the answer to that just the other day. Chad has officially flipped on Lori, saying that she manipulated him with uh, offering sex, offering all sorts of other manipulative techniques, and that Chad was just pretty much a victim of Lori, all in an effort to avoid the death penalty. Neama Rahmani joining us, former federal prosecutor and president of West Coast Trial Lawyers Association. Are you surprised?
I'm not surprised when you're handling death penalty cases as a defense lawyer. What you're trying to do is keep your client alive. It's hard to get not guilty verdicts or even hung juries in death penalty cases because, frankly, death penalty qualified jurors, folks that are willing to impose the death penalty, they tend to be more conservative than your average juror. So, if you're defending this type of case, your number one goal is to keep the client alive, and that's a win for capital defense lawyers.
Do you think that it would have gone that way had, in the Lori Vallow case, had the death been thrown off the table fairly close to the actual start of the trial? Had that still been on the table, do you think they would have gone that direction?
Maybe not. And going back to the Lori Vallow case, her lawyers won before the trial started, of course, because the prosecution really dropped the ball, didn't comply with their discovery obligations, and the judge took the death penalty off the table. It's really
Mhm.
sort of the cardinal sin. Obviously, I'm going on a little rant here as a former prosecutor,
Sure.
but your number one job is to make sure that you don't convict an innocent person and pursue justice. But number two is comply with your discovery obligations. Turn it over to the defense. So really pisses me off. And this is one of the things that, defense lawyers point to. And they say, some prosecutors, they're withholding evidence. So setting that aside, once Lori Vallow was just facing life and she ultimately got life, I mean, she was really free rolling there. I mean, she really didn't put up much of a defense, no defense at all.
Yeah.
And, she gave this rambling sort of statement at sentencing. But, going back to your original question, Tony, I really thought she would point the finger at Chad because
Yeah.
Chad is the cult leader, right? I mean, she's a woman, and a lot of times I think jurors are probably more susceptible to the notion that, a woman will be controlled by a man as opposed to vice versa. I
Mhm.
think Chad is going to have his work cut out for him in this case.
How do you think this is going to play? Because this is going to be a very different trial now than Lori Vallow's. A lot of us were wondering, is it's going to be the same thing over and over? Apparently not. We're going to hear a whole different side to this and probably more about Lori than we ever expected to know.
Yeah, so when you're talking about these cases, you oftentimes will see lawyers do one of two things, go for the not guilty, right? Dig your heels in, put up a substantive defense. Or sometimes it's just all about mitigation. I mean, we saw this recently with Nicholas Cruz, the Parkland school shooter, right? Worst school shooting in US history. He pled guilty to all these counts of murder and attempted murder, and the lawyers just went in for mitigation
Mhm.
and they won. So, I mean, let's not forget, you got to get 12 out of 12 for guilt. And there are going to be jurors that probably don't have any problem convicting Chad Daybell, but maybe they, are going to hesitate or have pause, if they don't know, hey, who really, dismembered and killed JJ and Tylee and burned the corpse and did all these horrible things. Because let's not forget, the prosecution's theory is that, they both did it. And frankly, they don't have to prove who did it, to convict of the conspiracy, right? I mean, they work together. But for the death penalty, maybe a little tougher. Chad can really put some doubt in there. Maybe, I could pick off one or two jurors and save his life.
It's going to be very interesting. I wonder if the death penalty will be on the table once we get to trial. Do you think that the hearing that's coming up on the 29th, do you think he has a chance at them taking that off the table with Chad's story that he was manipulated?
I don't think so. I think it's more of a question for the jurors, but they do raise one interesting argument because during Lori's trial, the prosecution was concerned that the jurors might think this was all Chad. So they really, emphasized Lori's role in all this and said she was an active participant. So now what the defense in the Chad case is doing is saying, well, look, in that previous trial, the prosecution said that this was all Lori, so this is an inconsistent type argument. Now they're trying to put Chad to death as the ringleader. Again, I'm not saying that argument's going to carry the day. It's a creative one. I
Mhm.
think really it's going to be a question for the jurors. So I understand why they're raising it, but I don't think it's going to win here, Tony.
No, no. Well, now, what does it mean for the upcoming Lori Vallow trial in Arizona? Considering at the last one, she did everything she could to make sure that Chad was not thrown under the bus and nothing negative was said about Chad. She was very upset with her attorneys for even bringing that up in the closing arguments. Uh, what happens now? I mean, I'm wondering, her mind is already obviously not in a good place. I see her exploding at this point. If her prophet or whatever she views Chad as suddenly is saying, it's all you, bitch. I don't know, like, how I question her stability, but let's say she does make it to a courtroom. Do you think we're going to see a different arguments from Lori Vallow next round, considering Chad has now, for all intents and purposes, cut his ties to Lori Vallow?
I think so. So, I mean, there's a couple issues you raised. First is Lori's competence, right? She was temporarily incompetent to stand trial. She was restored to competence, but really, I don't think she was particularly competent. She seemed loopy, really this kind of bizarre, rambling statement at sentencing. Clearly didn't want her lawyers to put up frankly, the best defense that she had, that this was all Chad and she was along for the ride, maybe as an accessory or maybe even some type of co-conspirator, but certainly not the more culpable party, not a principal in the case.
Yeah.
But like you said, Chad's trial is going to be very different because Chad and his lawyers have asked for there to be cameras in the courtroom. That's something that Lori didn't want, the prosecution didn't want, and the judge went along with it. But now you have Chad Daybell asking for cameras. So the entire world is going to be watching Chad Daybell's trial, including Lori Vallow. So if he starts pointing the finger at her, she may be singing a very different tune. She may fall out of love real quick, and we'll see. You know, Frankly, is it going to have any impact on the Arizona case? Not really, but we may see a very different trial strategy for Lori Vallow in that case. Because listen, she's going to die in prison one way or another, and I understand why you prosecute the Arizona case.
Yeah.
You got murder victims, but she may come out swinging and not hold the line like she did in Idaho.
I would wonder at this point, and I would hope, honestly, that wherever she's at right now, that she is on suicide watch because this sort of news, like I said, I can't imagine how that's being processed in a mind that already doesn't process things correctly.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the most horrific cases I've covered in 20 years. Killing your own kids, burying them in your backyard, one of whom is special needs. Frolicking in Hawaii. I mean, just terrible
Yeah.
facts, just terrible people. Again, my heart breaks for those kids and anyone that had the misfortune of having to run into Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell.
100%. Hey, it's Tony Brueski. If you want more of our interview with our guests, be sure to check out our podcast, Hitting Killers with Tony Brueski. Just search that wherever you download podcasts and press subscribe. Also, you can check out our YouTube channel for the full video version of the interviews as well, under the same name, Hitting Killers with Tony Brueski. Check it out, subscribe, binge, and enjoy. Thanks for watching.